Israel searches for traces of Hamas in raid of key Gaza hospital packed with patients. Biden, Xi met for hours and agreed to pick up the phone for any urgent concerns. That's progress. Vote on tentative contract with General Motors too close to call as more tallies are reported. Today is Thursday, November 16th, 2023, and this is the Dunkley Report. Israeli troops stormed into Gaza's largest hospital, searching for traces of Hamas inside and beneath the facility, filled with hundreds of patients, including newborns who have gone for days without electricity and with little food. Details from the Wednesday raid remained sketchy, but officials from Israel and Gaza presented different narratives about what was happening at the hospital. The Israeli army released video showing soldiers carrying boxes labeled as baby food and medical supplies, while Gaza health officials talked of terrified staff and patients as troops moved through the buildings. Israel faces pressure to prove its claim that Hamas had transformed Shifa Hospital into a command base. U.S. President Joe Biden and China's Xi Jinping have emerged from their first face-to-face meeting in a year, vowing to stabilize their fraught relationship and showcasing modest agreements to combat illegal fentanyl and re-establish military communications. There were still deep differences on economic competition and global security threats, but Biden said they agreed to pick up the phone and talk if urgent issues arise. Biden said that's important progress. Xi signaled later Wednesday that China would send the U.S. new pandas after recalling 3 from the National Zoo in Washington last week. Voting on the tentative contract agreement between General Motors and the United Auto Workers Union appears to be too close to call, as tallies at more factories were announced. The union on Wednesday hadn't posted final vote totals yet, but workers at several large factories who finished voting in the past few days have turned down the 4-year and 8-month deal by fairly large margins. A factory in Arlington, Texas, with about 5,000 workers, voted more than 60% in favor of the deal, however. Voting continues at Ford. The contract was passing overwhelmingly in early voting at Stellantis. The union's vote tracker shows that 79.7% voted in favor, with many large factories yet to finish. The British government says it will still try to send some migrants on a one-way trip to Rwanda, despite the UK Supreme Court ruling that the contentious plan is illegal. 5 justices on the country's top court say asylum seekers would be at real risk of ill treatment because they could be sent back to their home countries once they were in Rwanda. The court cited Rwanda's poor human rights record, including enforced disappearances and torture. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has pledged to stop migrants reaching Britain in small boats. He says the government will strike a treaty with Rwanda that will address the court's concerns. A new report has identified nearly 500 industrial fishing vessels where workers face hazardous, forced conditions sometimes akin to slavery. The research by the Washington, D.C.-based Financial Transparency Coalition is the most comprehensive attempt to date to identify the vessels and companies responsible for abuses at sea. 1/4 of the suspected ships are flagged to China. But the owner of many of the vessels are unknown because of a lack of transparency and regulatory oversight in the fishing industry, the authors say. Batman and the Joker, a man decked out in a full-body lion costume, another whose head and arms have been replaced by chainsaws. This isn't Carnival or Comic-Con, but an outlandish campaign rally for presidential candidate Javier Milei in Argentina. His candidacy started as a made-for-television spectacle, and his followers picked up the baton and often turned rallies into opportunities to show their devotion to their candidate using props that go viral on social media. Milei will face Economy Minister Sergio Massa in a NOV 19 runoff, with polls indicating a tight race. Ahead of the highly anticipated meeting on Wednesday between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping, Chinese state media have taken a new tone toward the U.S., with less negative coverage, calls for a return to warmer ties, and stories of Americans with positive connections to the country. The messaging follows several years of unprecedented tensions between the two countries. Chinese media have focused on a recent visit by members of the Philadelphia Orchestra, marking the 50th anniversary of its history-making trip to China that helped build then-fledgling U.S.-China ties, and on another visit by members of the Flying Tigers, a group of American military pilots who helped China fight Japan in World War II. A German think tank has reported that to prevent global warming from surpassing the critical threshold of 1.5 Celsius, major Asian economies must ensure they can get half of their total electricity from renewables by 2030. The report by researchers of Agora Energiewende released Wednesday says that 30% of that renewable energy should come from wind and solar power, compared to current levels below 6%. The study reviewed energy plans of Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Taiwan. The gist of the findings is that those countries need to phase out their dependence on fossil fuels to help the world attain even the minimal goal for limiting global warming. The House has voted overwhelmingly to prevent a government shutdown. New Republican Speaker Mike Johnson was forced to reach across the aisle to Democrats when hard-right conservatives revolted against his plan. Johnson's proposal to temporarily fund the government into the new year passed on a bipartisan 336-95 tally, with 93 Republicans voting against it. He showed a willingness to leave his right-flank Republicans behind and work with Democrats, the same political move that cost the last House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, his job just weeks ago. Johnson's approach, which the Senate is expected to approve by week's end, effectively pushes a final showdown over government funding to the new year. Nearly 9 out of 10 parents believe their child is performing at grade level, despite standardized tests showing far fewer students are on track. That's according to a poll released Wednesday by Gallup and the nonprofit Learning Heroes. Many parents rely on report cards for a sense of their children's progress, but researchers say they might be missing the whole picture. Without that knowledge, parents may not seek opportunities for extra support for their children. In a federal survey, school officials said half of all U.S. students started last school year behind grade level in at least one subject. Today's news was reported by the Associated Press. This has been the international news for Thursday, November 16th, 2023. Thanks again for joining us here at the Dunkley Report.